I want to tell you about a woman I almost walked past. I want to tell you about a man who nearly died at 30,000 feet, and what I heard in the dark when the lights went out, and why I spent the next 3 months trying to convince myself it never happened. But there is one part of this story I almost never tell, not because it embarrasses me, not because I am ashamed of it, because even now, years later, I still cannot fully explain it, and I am a man who has spent his entire adult life believing that if you cannot explain something, you keep looking until you can. I need you to stay with me for this one, all the way through, because if you leave before the end, you will only have half of it, and half of this story is just a strange thing that happened on a plane. The whole story is something else. Her name was Anna Whitmore. She was 61 years old, retired, and lived alone in a small house in Adelaide, with a garden she kept up and a kitchen that always smelled like something warm. She had spent nearly 30 years teaching primary school children how to read. She was the kind of woman who kept peppermints in her handbag and tissue in both coat pockets, and always arrived places early because being late made her anxious. She also hated flying. Not in a dramatic way, she never screamed or gripped the armrest until her knuckles went white. She just went very quiet. She focused on her breathing. She held something in her hands. That morning, the thing in her hands was a small Bible with a worn cover and a bookmark made from a piece of ribbon that had once tied a gift. It was a Tuesday in early autumn. The morning was cold enough that she could see her breath in the kitchen. The tiles were freezing under her feet when she got up before 5 to make tea. The kettle clicked and groaned the way old kettles do. She stood beside the counter in her dressing gown and looked out through the kitchen window at the dark street while she waited. On the table beside her cup was the Bible. And beside the Bible was a photograph. The photograph was of her husband, taken some years before he got sick. He was laughing at something just outside the frame. She could never remember what. She had tried many times to remember what had made him laugh like that. She never could. She picked the photograph up and looked at it the way she must have looked at it every morning, not with fresh grief, with something quieter than that, the kind of sadness that has been carried so long it has worn smooth. She set it down carefully and opened the Bible. She did not read. She sat with it open in front of her and prayed. She had been praying the same thing all week, not for safety on the flight, not for good weather or on-time departures. She had been asking for something harder than that. She had been asking for the courage to forgive her son. His name was Daniel. He was 34. They had not spoken properly in almost a year, not since a fight that had started about something small and ended with things being said that neither of them had taken back. She did not go into the details of that fight with people. But it had to do with his marriage, and with the way she had spoken about his wife, and with the grief she was still carrying from losing her husband, and the way that grief had turned sharp and started cutting people she did not mean to cut. She was flying to Melbourne that morning to see him. She was terrified, not of the plane, of arriving. Before she left the house, she pulled a piece of paper from the pocket of her coat. She had written on it the night before, just a few lines, a prayer for Daniel's marriage, a prayer for his wife, whose name she wrote down and underlined. And at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, one line about herself. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it inside the Bible, between the pages where the bookmark sat. Then she checked her bag 3 times, picked up her keys, and walked out into the cold. She did not know what was going to happen that morning. She did not know about the man sitting several rows behind her who would watch her bow her head over that Bible and decide quietly that she was the kind of person he had no patience for. She did not know about any of it. She just walked to the car in the dark, holding her handbag against her side, probably checking in her coat pocket for the peppermints. I have to stop here and be honest with you. I am the man who was watching her. My name is Samir. I am a nurse. I have worked emergency departments for over 12 years. I have seen things in those years that most people never have to see. I have been in rooms where a person is alive and then suddenly is not. I have done compressions on chests and watched monitors and made fast decisions in situations where there is no time to feel anything until later. I was 38 at the time. I was exhausted, not just from the shifts, though the shifts had been brutal. I was exhausted in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. I had been working in emergency care long enough that I had developed a very firm opinion about the way the world worked. The world worked on causes and effects, on biology and physics and the limits of the human body, on whether the ambulance arrived fast enough, whether the airway was clear, whether the dosage was correct, whether you had the right equipment and enough time. That was the world I lived in. Faith was something else, something people held on to because looking at reality directly was too hard. I had watched people pray beside hospital beds for years. Sometimes the patient got better. Often they did not. The difference was never the prayer. It was always the medicine, the timing, the body itself giving something back. I had no anger toward people who believed. I just had no room for it. I grew up Muslim, not because I thought deeply about it as a child, but because it was what I was. I fasted when I was supposed to. I knew the prayers by sound before I knew them by meaning, but somewhere between my first year of nursing and my fifth, that framework quietly stopped holding me. Not dramatically. I did not make an announcement. I just gradually stopped believing that anything beyond the physical was real. And once I stopped believing it, I found it hard to take seriously in other people. I boarded that flight after a string of long shifts that had left me with that specific kind of tired, where everything slightly irritates you. The seat was too small. The air was stale. The man beside me had earphones in, and his elbow on my side of the armrest. I was not in a good state. I noticed Anna when the flight was still boarding. She was moving slowly down the aisle, checking her seat number twice, adjusting her bag. She sat down a few rows ahead of me and to the left. I could see her clearly. She pulled out her Bible almost immediately. I looked at it and looked away. I told myself it was none of my business what people read on planes. That was true, but I also noticed the small flicker of something in my chest that I would now describe as impatience. At the time, I just called it being tired. The plane taxied. It lifted. Anna bowed her head. I looked once, briefly, and gave a small shake of my head. Then I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The turbulence started about 40 minutes into the flight. It was not a warning bump. It was the kind that arrives without introduction. The plane dropped hard, a sudden clean drop that brought the stomach up into the chest, and the cabin filled immediately with the sounds of people gasping and grabbing and one child starting to cry. Then it hit again, harder. Luggage shifted in the overhead compartments. A bag came open somewhere behind me. The lights flickered once and held. A woman near the front made a sound that was trying not to be a scream. I grabbed the armrest. Training or not, your body responds before your brain does. That is just how it works. Anna's Bible fell from her lap into the aisle. So it happened. She reached for it, and then the plane lurched again, and she sat back. Then the man across the aisle from her made a sound that was not a gasp and not a word. It was the sound a person makes when their body stops cooperating. I know that sound. I have heard it many times. He was a heavy man, maybe late 50s, wearing a gray jacket. He had been sitting quietly the whole flight, and now he was sliding sideways in his seat, and his face was wrong, and people around him were frozen because they did not know what they were seeing yet. I was already out of my seat. I do not remember deciding to get up. I just was up. I pushed past a flight attendant who was coming the other direction and reached him. I checked his airway. Not breathing. I checked his pulse at the neck. Nothing. I told the flight attendant to call ahead and get the cabin crew with the medical kit. I told the man in the seat beside him to move. I pulled the passenger into the aisle, positioning him on his back, and I started compressions. I was counting under my breath. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The sound of chest compressions is not like what you see in films. It is harder, more physical. You feel it in your shoulders and your back. That is when Anna started praying aloud. She was kneeling near me. I do not know when she had moved. She had her hands clasped together and her eyes closed, and she was speaking quietly but clearly, asking Jesus to save this man. I turned my head toward her without stopping compressions. I said sharply that praying would not restart a heart and that I needed her to give me room. She looked at me. She did not argue. She did not look offended. She simply moved back slightly and continued praying, quietly now, so that only she could hear herself. I turned back to the man. The lights flickered again. This time they went out almost completely. Not total darkness. There was gray light coming from somewhere, an exit sign, or the emergency strips along the floor, but the cabin was dim enough that I could barely see the passenger's face. I kept going. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Somewhere in the dark, someone behind me said, in a low and frightened voice, that they thought he was dead. And then Anna whispered something. She was right beside me. I heard her clearly, even with everything else happening. She said, "Jesus, please don't leave him." That was all. What happened next, I cannot fully explain. Anna turned her head sharply to the left. I saw her do it from the corner of my eye. She turned as if someone had spoken her name. She was looking at the empty aisle. There was no one there. Her face went completely still. Then she sat back on her heels and wrapped both arms around her Bible and closed her eyes. I kept doing compressions. The lights came back gradually. The turbulence eased. The plane steadied. The cabin crew arrived with the medical kit. I kept working. The crew member knelt across from me and took over the breaths. I do not know exactly how many minutes passed. In emergencies, time does the thing where it moves differently, and then I felt something under my fingers. I stopped. I pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. There was a pulse. Weak, irregular, but there. I froze for exactly half a second. In 12 years of emergency nursing, I had worked many cardiac arrests. I knew the statistics on survival rates for in-flight cardiac events. I knew what outcome to expect after this long without a pulse. I knew what that half-second meant, and I did not let myself think it clearly. I told the crew member to keep monitoring him. I checked his airway again. His chest was moving on its own. He was breathing. The crew member looked at me with wide eyes. I looked back at her and said nothing. From somewhere behind me, I heard Anna crying, not loudly. She was sitting in her seat with her back straight and her Bible against her chest, and tears running down her face without any sound coming out. She was not celebrating. She was not cheering. She was just crying the way people cry when something happens that is too large for them to hold. I looked at her hands. They were still clasped together. I turned back to the passenger and told myself the CPR had worked. That was all. That was the explanation. But something was bothering me, and I could not name it yet. For the rest of the flight, the passengers were quiet in the way people go quiet after something serious. Some of them whispered. Some of them stared at the seats in front of them. A few of them leaned across the aisle and spoke to each other in low voices about what they had just seen. One man, sitting 2 rows behind where it happened, leaned forward and tapped Anna gently on the shoulder. He said he had heard a voice during the blackout. Anna went still. She asked him what he meant. He said he had heard a calm voice, a man's voice. He was not sure where it came from. He thought it said something. He could not catch the whole thing. But it was clear, and it was calm, and it did not match anyone he had seen speaking. Anna looked at him for a moment. Then she asked another passenger nearby if they had heard anything. The other passenger said yes. A voice. During the dark part, when the lights were almost gone, Anna did not say what she had heard. She nodded slowly and looked at her lap. She was afraid to say it. She did not want anyone to think she had imagined it. But I was listening. I had heard something too. I had already decided it was someone speaking in the cabin. Voices carry strangely in enclosed metal spaces. There was a perfectly ordinary explanation. There was always a perfectly ordinary explanation. I told myself that, and I went back to my seat, and I looked out the window for the rest of the flight. After we landed, everything moved quickly. The passenger was taken off the plane on a stretcher. Paramedics met the flight. Statements were taken. People were asked to wait. I spoke to several people and gave my account and was told they would follow up. At some point in the middle of all of it, one of the airline staff mentioned, quietly, that the cabin announcement system had experienced a technical failure during the flight, not a partial failure. The system had been non-functional during the blackout period. They could not account for any voice coming through the speakers. There should not have been any voice. I stood there with that information, and I did what I had trained myself to do. I filed it. I did not react to it outwardly. I moved on to the next thing. But something had tightened in my chest. I started asking, casually, what other passengers had heard. I framed it as curiosity. Maybe I was still collecting information from the emergency, I told myself, doing a kind of informal debrief. 2 people described the same voice. Independent of each other. Independent of Anna. Neither of them had spoken to her. One of them described it as calm and clear. The other one said it felt like it came from directly beside them, even though there was no one there. The same voice, two separate people. I thanked them and walked away. The tightening in my chest was now something I could not ignore, though I was trying very hard to. I spotted Anna near the gate. She was standing to the side of the crowd, holding her bag with both hands, looking at the exit doors. Then those doors opened, and a man walked through. He was tall, younger than her. He had her eyes. He stopped when he saw her, and his face did something I recognized as the face a person makes when they have been afraid of a moment for a long time, and now that the moment is here, they do not know how to be in it. Anna walked toward him. She reached up and held his face in both hands. She was smaller than him. She stood on her toes slightly to do it, and she just held his face. He put his arms around her. There was nothing dramatic about it. No speech, no dramatic words that I could hear. Just a mother and her son standing together in an airport, after too long apart. But Anna looked different from the woman I had watched pray on that plane. Not happier, exactly. Lighter, like she had put something down. I turned and walked to the baggage claim, and told myself I had done my job, and it was over. It was not over. In the weeks after the flight, I went back to work. My shifts were the same. Emergency department, rotating roster, the same kind of controlled chaos I had spent years learning to move through. But small things started to bother me. There was a monitor in one of the rooms, old equipment, due to be replaced. I watched a colleague disconnect it fully at the end of a shift, both the power cable and the battery backup, and walk out. I went back in that room 20 minutes later for something else. The monitor was displaying a reading. I stood there and looked at it. Then I checked the cables. They were disconnected. I connected them again and the machine came back on normally. I told myself it was a power surge, a residual charge. There was an explanation. There was always an explanation. Then a family came in with a patient. He had been brought in by ambulance. I had never seen any of them before. As I was heading into the room, one of the family members, a woman who had clearly been crying for some time, reached out and touched my arm. She said, "We prayed for you before you came." She meant they had prayed for whoever would treat him. She did not know my name or anything about me. I thanked her and went in. Later that week, a patient I had been checking on regularly, a man in his 70s who had been in and out of the department for months, reached up and grabbed my wrist while I was adjusting something near his bed. He looked directly at me. He said, "Don't be afraid." Then he let go. He did not know anything about the flight. He did not know anything about me. He was not even fully lucid. He said it the way people say things when they are between states of sleep and waking, when whatever filter usually sits between the inside of a person and the outside of them has gone thin. Don't be afraid. I went to the break room and sat down. I was not afraid. I told myself I was not afraid. I sat there for 10 minutes and stared at the wall. Then I went back out and finished my shift. I was not sleeping well by this point. I would lie in my apartment after night shifts, and the ceiling would be gray in the early morning light, and I would lie there and think. I did not want to think. I wanted to sleep. But the thinking came anyway. The passenger's pulse returning. The voice. Two separate people describing the same thing. The airline staff confirming the speakers had failed. Anna's face when she looked at the empty aisle. Anna looking lighter at the airport. The monitor. The family who prayed for whoever was coming. The old man who told me not to be afraid. I told myself each one was explainable. And then I heard from someone through the investigation process that the passenger had spoken to the incident team. He had survived. He was recovering. And in his statement, he described something that happened while he was unconscious. He described seeing someone beside him. He could not describe the clothing clearly. He was not even fully certain what he had seen was a person in the normal sense of the word, but he remembered the feeling of not being alone, and he remembered hearing something. The words were, "You are not finished." I read that, and I set the paper down on my kitchen table, and I sat with it for a long time. Those 4 words sat in my chest like something too large for the space it was sitting in. You are not finished. Anna had heard. He is not alone. And I had heard something in the dark, something I had been refusing to name, something I had filed under unexplained audio event and tried to move past. I am not going to tell you exactly what I heard in that cabin. Not yet. What I will tell you is that I sat at that kitchen table And for the first time in a very long time, I had no explanation ready, and I did not know what to do with that. Weeks passed. I was going through the routines of my life, but I was not fully inside them. I was somewhere slightly behind myself, watching. At work, I was still doing my job. I was still good at my job. From the outside, nothing had changed. But something had happened to the certainty I used to carry. I had built my life on a particular kind of knowing, on evidence and process and physical cause and effect. That framework had kept me steady through some of the hardest things a person can see in a career. It had been reliable. I had trusted it the way you trust the ground under your feet. And now it was not holding me the way it used to. I started noticing, for the first time, the things I had always explained away. Not supernatural things, just small human things. The way certain families who prayed seemed to carry something different from the families who did not, even when the outcome was the same. The way some patients seemed to go peacefully while others did not, and how the people around them seemed to affect that. Small things that my framework had always dismissed as subjective or coincidental. I still dismissed them, but I noticed myself dismissing them. That was new. That had not happened before. Meanwhile, I had found out something about Anna, through what was available, through the proper follow-up channels from the incident. She lived in Adelaide. She was volunteering at a community school. She had reconnected with her son. I do not know why I kept thinking about her. Maybe because she was the one person from that flight who I had actively dismissed and now I could not stop thinking about. Maybe because she had been praying right beside me when it happened. Maybe because she had looked lighter at the airport. I did not contact her. Not yet. It was a Tuesday night. Several weeks after the flight, I was home after a late shift. My apartment is small. One bedroom, a kitchen, a small living room with a window that looks out at the street. The refrigerator hums. At night, you can hear the traffic from the main road 3 blocks over, a low, constant sound that after a while, you stop registering. It was past midnight. I was sitting at the kitchen table. I had not eaten properly. There was a half-empty glass of water in front of me, and the kitchen light was on, and everything was exactly as ordinary as it always was. I was tired, but I had stopped being able to sleep without thinking, so I sat. The question I had been avoiding for weeks was sitting right in front of me now, because I had run out of ways to avoid it. What if the voice was real? Not what if there was an audio anomaly. Not what if 2 passengers independently experienced the same auditory illusion due to the stress of the situation. Not any of the explanations I had been carrying. What if the voice was real? I sat with that question for a long time. Then something happened inside me that I am not proud of, but I am going to tell you because it is the truth. I got angry. I got very angry. Not at anyone I could name. Just angry. The way you get angry when something is threatening the version of the world you have built your life on. When something keeps showing up in the corners of your vision and you cannot keep not seeing it. I said it out loud. I said, if you are real, then I want an answer, because I have watched too many people die to believe you are paying attention. So if you are there, then answer me. I said it like a challenge, not like a prayer. I said it, and then the apartment was quiet, and the refrigerator hummed, and the traffic sat in the background, and nothing happened. I almost felt relieved. And then the room changed. It did not change visually. The light did not shift. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared in a flash. It changed the way a room changes when someone walks in behind you. You know the feeling, when the air of a space is slightly different because it is no longer empty. Your body knows it before your mind names it. The back of my neck went cold. My shoulders tightened. I stopped breathing for a moment, and then I breathed very carefully. Slowly, I became aware of a presence in the room. It was not behind me. It was not in front of me. It was simply there, in the way that a thing fills a space, without requiring a specific location. I did not look up from the table. I could not look up. My hands were flat on the table in front of me, and I was aware of every small sensation. The wood under my palms, the faint cold of the air on my forearms, my own heartbeat, which had changed pace. I knew. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I know how it sounds, and I am not a man who says things like this. I knew. Not because of a light, or a sound, or a vision. I knew the way you know something that is too large to be argued with. Jesus was in that room. And the most frightening thing was not that. The most frightening thing was what came immediately after. The awareness that I was completely known, not observed. Known. There is a difference. To be observed is to be watched from the outside. To be known is to have someone standing in every room of you at once. Every room I had locked. Every room I had not been in myself for years. Every patient I had lost. Every time I had rolled my eyes at a praying family. Every time I had been dismissive of someone's faith and told myself I was being rational. Every time I had felt something and refused to feel it. Every night I had lain awake, unable to name what was wrong. All of it. Known. I did not weep. I am not a man who weeps easily. What happened was closer to the feeling of something releasing in the chest. A long, tight thing letting go. I kept my hands flat on the table. And then, he spoke. Not out loud. Not through speakers. Not in a way I can fully explain to you. But the words were clear, and they were not mine. He said, "You kept asking why I did not save everyone. You never asked why I saved you. That was all." 7 words, and then 7 more. I sat with them. And then, something I had been carrying for 12 years of emergency nursing broke open, because that was the question I had never let myself ask. In all the years of watching people die, in all the nights I had spent reworking what I could have done differently, I had asked every version of the impossible question except that one. Why did that passenger on the plane get his pulse back when others did not? I had asked it as an accusation, as evidence that nothing was watching. I had never once asked it as the question it actually was. Why me? Why was I the one standing there? Why had I been placed in the middle of that, exhausted and angry and certain of everything, on a Tuesday morning in autumn, sitting several rows behind a woman I had already dismissed? The presence did not give me a long answer. He said, "One more thing. I was with you before you knew my name." And then, the room was a room again. The refrigerator, the traffic, the light over the kitchen table. I was alone. I sat at that table for a very long time. I do not know exactly how long. I did not look at my phone. At some point I stood up slowly and went to the shelf in my small living room where I had put a Bible I had bought months earlier after the flight. On an impulse I had not examined and never opened. I took it down. I sat back at the kitchen table with it in front of me. I did not read it that night. Not really. I opened it and looked at the pages, and then I just sat there with it open. That was all I could manage. That was enough. That same night, Anna was at home. She did not know what was happening in my apartment. She had no idea I existed beyond the man who had pushed through to do CPR on the plane. She was making tea for her son, who had come to visit for the week. It was late. The house was warm. She could hear him in the next room, moving around. She sat at her own kitchen table while the kettle boiled, and she reached for her Bible. Inside it, still folded between the pages, was the handwritten prayer she had made before the flight. The one for Daniel's marriage. The one for herself. She read it. Then she took a pen from the counter and carefully wrote one new line underneath what she had written before. She wrote, "Thank you for letting me see that you were there." She folded the paper. She put it back. She closed the Bible. Her son called something from the other room. She called back. She got up and made the tea. Nothing supernatural happened. No moment of revelation. She just went to bed an hour later and slept. But that sentence she had written, that quiet, simple line, written in a kitchen at the end of an ordinary evening, would turn out to matter. It always does, I think. The small written things, the ordinary honest things, they hold what the big dramatic moments cannot. Several more weeks passed. I had been reading the Bible in pieces, not systematically, not with a study guide or a plan. I just opened it when I sat down at the table in the evenings, and I read whatever was in front of me. Sometimes it made sense to me immediately. Sometimes I read the same line 4 times and still felt like I was looking at it through glass. But I kept going back. I was also thinking about Anna. I had the contact information available to me through proper follow-up channels. I had not used it. I had taken it out and looked at it several times and then put it away. I told myself I did not know what I would even say. That was true. But it was not the whole reason. The whole reason was closer to the fact that seeing her would make everything real in a different way. Up until then, The encounter in my apartment could still live in a private place inside me that I had not shared with anyone. If I went to see Anna, I would have to say it out loud. Saying it out loud was different. I almost gave up finding her more than once. Then one morning I was off shift, and I drove. I found the school where she was volunteering. I knew the suburb. I sat in the car across the road for a while. I went to get out, and then sat back down. I watched the building. Then, through the low wire fence along the footpath, I saw Anna. She was in the small outdoor area near the building's entrance. She was kneeling on the ground. There was a young child in front of her, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing with one foot forward and an expression of deep concentration. The child's shoelaces were undone. Anna was helping him tie them. She was saying something to him, and he was trying and failing, and she laughed, a real quiet laugh, and showed him again slowly. He tried again. She said something, and he looked up at her, and she nodded. I sat in my car and watched this ordinary small scene, and I felt something that I did not have a clean word for. I had been looking for something dramatic, some final piece of evidence, some undeniable confirmation that would make everything make sense. And here was this woman kneeling on a path, helping a child tie his shoes. She was not glowing. She was not surrounded by anything. She was just a 61-year-old retired teacher doing something small and kind in the middle of a Tuesday, but she was living differently. That was what I had been seeing since the airport. Not happiness exactly, just a different way of being inside her own life. Like the weight had been distributed differently. I got out of the car. She saw me before I reached the fence. She straightened up slowly and looked at me, and I watched her place me. It took a moment. Then her face changed. She recognized me. I stopped at the fence. We looked at each other. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. I had imagined this conversation many times in the past weeks. I had rehearsed things to say, reasonable things, measured things, things that would allow me to ask what I needed to ask without giving too much away. None of those things came out. She said, "Are you all right?" And that was the end of whatever composure I had brought with me. Not because the question was profound, because it was the most ordinary and direct question a person could ask, and it was coming from the woman I had told to step aside on the floor of that plane. The woman I had looked at with impatience when I saw her praying, the woman I had dismissed before I knew a single thing about her. She was asking if I was all right. I told her I needed to tell her something. She nodded and said she had a short break starting in a few minutes, and she pointed toward a bench near the building. We sat down. I told her about the voice. I told her what I had heard in the cabin during the blackout, and what I had been refusing to call it. I told her about the airline staff and the speakers. I told her about the 2 passengers who had described the same thing to me after we landed. She listened. She did not interrupt. She did not lean forward with excitement. She just listened, in the same way she had knelt beside me on the floor of that plane, present and quiet, and not demanding anything. Then, I told her what happened in my apartment. I said it plainly. I said I was alone, and it was late, and I had challenged God out of frustration, and something had happened that I could not explain, and I knew who was in that room with me, and what was said to me was specific, and it was not something I had thought of myself. I said, I know what I saw. I know who it was. Anna looked at me for a long moment. She said, I prayed for you after that flight. I did not expect that. I asked why. She said, because you looked like a man who was carrying something heavy. I had been trying to explain away everything she believed. I had been in my apartment, challenging the God she spoke to every morning, and she had been praying for me. I did not know what to do with that information. I still do not, entirely. I told her I did not know what came next. I told her I had been reading, but I did not understand most of it. I told her I had not told anyone else what had happened, and I did not know what kind of person I was supposed to be now, or whether I was supposed to go somewhere, or say something publicly, or what any of this meant for the rest of my life. I said all of that in a rush, and then I stopped. Anna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You don't have to know everything today. 7 words. I had heard 7 words in my apartment that had broken something open, and now 7 more words were doing something different. Not breaking something open, putting something down. You don't have to know everything today. I sat with that on a bench outside a small school on a Tuesday morning in autumn, and for the first time since the flight, the pressure behind my sternum eased slightly. Just slightly. That was enough. I began following Jesus the way someone learns to walk after an injury. Carefully, a little unsteady, aware of every step. I started reading the Bible more consistently. I found a church not far from my apartment, and I went one Sunday morning and sat near the back and said nothing to anyone and left immediately after. I went again the following week, and the week after. I did not stand up and tell my story. I did not become a different person overnight. I still got impatient in traffic. I still got frustrated with bureaucratic systems at work that slowed down patient care. I still carried the faces of patients I had not been able to save. That did not go away. I do not think it was supposed to go away. But things changed. At work, when frightened families arrived in the emergency department, I started sitting down before I spoke to them, not standing over them with information and next steps, sitting at their level, taking a breath first. When a patient asked me to pray for them, I no longer looked past them or changed the subject. Sometimes I told them I would. Sometimes, when the moment was right and no one was looking for anything, I simply held their hand while their family prayed beside the bed. I did not announce what had changed in me. We just tried to be different in the small daily moments where I had previously been closed. I went back to see Anna a few more times. We did not have long conversations. We had tea, and we talked about ordinary things, and sometimes she asked how I was doing, and I told her honestly. One afternoon, I told her that she had been the first person to show me what faith looked like without forcing it on anyone. She looked slightly uncomfortable with the compliment, the way certain people do when they are being thanked for something they feel they only did accidentally. She said she had not been trying to show me anything. I said, I know, that's why it worked. There is one question I still carry. I have thought about how to say this honestly, without it sounding like I have lost what happened to me. I have not lost it. I am certain of what I experienced. I am not going back to the man I was before that Tuesday night in my apartment. That man is gone, and I do not miss him, though I understand him. But the question is still there. Why did Jesus save that particular passenger on that flight, when so many others I have stood beside in my career did not get the same thing? Why is the outcome not consistent? I do not know. I have asked. I have sat with that question in the early morning before shifts, when the apartment is dark and quiet, and I am trying to hold all the faces I still remember. I have asked it honestly, and I have not received an answer the way I received an answer the night of the encounter. Maybe that question does not have an answer I can hold right now. Maybe the answer is something I will understand later. Maybe it is the question itself that I am supposed to carry, because it keeps me honest and present and aware that I am not the one in charge of outcomes. I do not know. What I know is this. The man who boarded a flight one Tuesday morning, certain that faith was weakness and prayer was for people who could not face the truth, did not come home the same man. He came home quieter. He came home carrying something new that he still does not fully understand and makes no claim to fully understand. He came home and has not been the same since. Some mornings I make coffee and check my phone and go through all the ordinary things that make up a life. And then I hear an aircraft passing over. I stop whatever I am doing. For a moment I am back inside that plane. I can feel the seat. I can hear the drop of the turbulence and the sounds people made. I can see the dim gray of the cabin when the lights went almost completely out. I can hear Anna whispering. I can feel the pulse return under my fingertips. I can feel what I felt in my apartment. And then I come back to the kitchen and the coffee and the ordinary morning. I still do not pretend to have everything figured out. But when I am standing beside a hospital bed now, and a family is gathered around someone they are afraid of losing, and they begin to pray, I do not think what I used to think. I do not think, that will not help. I think, maybe they know something I once refused to see. And I stay. I do not interrupt. I do not look at my watch. I do not make my face neutral in the particular way I used to make it neutral when I wanted to wait for the praying to finish. I just stay. That is what this did to me. It did not give me perfect certainty. It did not answer every question. It did not take away the weight of 12 years of emergency care. It just changed what I do with my hands when someone else is praying. I keep them still. I stay in the room. Before I go, I want to ask you something. You came this far in the story. That means something. It means you were looking for something, or maybe just willing to hear something, and I am grateful for that. I want you to think right now about the person you are most afraid of losing. Not in a general way, the specific person, the one who comes into your mind before I finish that sentence. Maybe it is someone whose health is uncertain. Maybe it is a relationship that is breaking and you do not know how to stop it. Maybe it is someone who has walked away and you are not sure they are coming back. Maybe it is someone you love who is living in a way that frightens you. If that person came into your mind just now, I want to ask you to do one thing. Leave their name in the comments, or just leave the situation, however much you are willing to share. You do not have to explain everything, because there are people reading those comments who will pray, and I have now spent enough time on the other side of that to know that it is not nothing at all.